my favorite part of my job by far is interacting with you and those of you who work in the districts and charter schools. And just couldn't be happier to be here with you today. So thank you for making this a priority and joining today. All right, well, here we go. So here's our agenda. This is our data privacy team. So some of us focus more on providing LEA support, specifically John and Nicole. And by LEA, I mean local education agency, AKA districts and charter schools. Others focus more on internal work. So Melissa does mostly internal work and is not here today, but and Jeremy's kind of split between the two. And then I am excited to announce that we have a new member of our team, Matt Winters. Matt is a great resource to LEAs. He used to work for UEN and was a great resource there. And then starting in June of last year, he started working for USBE as the AI specialist. And he is going to continue that work, but he just is now a member of our team, which we are extremely excited about. All right, people, we are going to be spending the next 20 minutes talking about legislative updates. So you might remember that little animated video from, I don't know, 30 years ago, the I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. So the legislative session is the process that is documented in that little animated video, in which bills are presented by legislators. They vote on those bills, and then if the bill passes and is signed by, in our case, the governor, then they become law. So this happens every year in the general legislative session, which is held January through February. It's a wild and crazy and busy time of year where lots of bills are presented. This year, a majority of them passed. And some of them relate directly to data privacy in our space. And so today we're going to be talking about 5 of those bills that passed that are, now law and that will impact you. I'm going to say 2 of them have the most impact on districts and charter schools. And then the other 3 are sort of secondary impact, but I just wanted to make you aware of them. So here we go. The first bill is HB 124, Education Employee Privacy. So in this bill, it addresses 2 sort of prongs of employee privacy. One is regarding sharing employee work-related information. So the language in the bill says that you can't, an LEA or USBE for that matter, but a district and charter school can't, quote, sell or otherwise transfer an employee's work-related info. Also, work-related info is defined in the bill as basically like what you would probably normally think of, which is like phone number, email address, work address. It doesn't include name, but some of those other things. So you can't sell or otherwise transfer an employee's work-related contact info to a third party if the sale or transfer is an isolated or standalone transaction. I will note that GRAMA still applies. So if you receive a Government Records and Access Management Act request for public records, that you still follow the rules of GRAMA to decide whether you're obligated to disclose that information. It's still the case that a lot of districts and schools are going to continue posting employee email addresses and whatnot on your website. So that's not prohibited. This is, as the sponsor presented it, this is more intended to address what was communicated to be, hey, districts and charter schools are selling bulk lists of employee information to marketers. I don't know to what extent that's happening. I don't think that's really happening, or at least not often. But that was the concern that was addressed by this legislator. So, legislator. Okay, so that's the first part. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. The second part addresses an employee's personal device. So the language in the bill says that that an LEA can't require an employee to download certain technologies on a personal device. Specifically, these are data collecting technologies. So again, the bill sponsor was concerned that employees were being required to download apps that then had excessive access to the data on the employee's phone beyond what was reasonable and necessary. They mentioned a couple apps in particular that they were like, this is crazy that employees have to download this because we feel like it's a real invasion of privacy. Uh, so the law does not prevent employees from downloading technology on a device. It just prevents the LEA from requiring them to do so. And if they do require them to do so, then they need to provide an accommodation. I will say, oh, David, I don't know that I want to like call out the specific vendor that was mentioned, but I will say one of the apps that was mentioned was a school safety app that like a school was using to keep track of who was present in the school, conduct background checks, and that kind of thing. That was the one that they brought up in their presentation, which is a public record. So, David, if you're super curious, you could go back and watch the discussion in the legislative session, which is posted online. Okay, so a big question that came up here, two big questions that came up here is, okay, well, under a separate law, we need to maintain like a public safety communication. Can we still do that? And the answer is yes, so long as it's not collecting data unnecessarily. And if it is, then you need to give an accommodation to your employees. Another question that came up is whether this would impact multi-factor authentication, which is highly awesome if you are moving in that direction to implement multi-factor authentication for employees. Again, if the app does not excessively collect data, then you should be good to go. If it does, then you need to provide an accommodation, like a YubiKey or something for the employees.
And Katie, they would only need to provide an accommodation if an employee doesn't want to install that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy, for clarifying that. Yes, okay, great. All right, so I've got a couple action items listed here for you for your future reference. Oh, one more thing. Employees, if employees feel like either of these rights have been violated, or if either of these provisions have been not met by the district or school where they work, then they can file a complaint to the State Board of Education, which, as far as we know, will probably come to the student data privacy team to investigate and address. All right, the next one that has the biggest impact on districts and charter schools is HB 444. This is an amendment of the bill that passed last year. So last year, a bill passed HB 491 called, I think, Data Privacy Amendments. And it set up for the very first time the Government Data Privacy Act, which we sometimes call GDPA. So you might remember that we talked about this in the spring training last year. Jeremy gave a presentation on GDPA in the fall conference last year. So you've been hearing about this from us a little bit. And this bill is what they sometimes call a cleanup bill, where it makes some changes to the bill that was passed last year. So I've picked out a few of the things that I think most apply to you. The first is that it changes the role of the state privacy officer, which, for those of you who know Nora Kurzova, she was the state privacy officer. It changes her role from state privacy officer to state privacy auditor. And this is important because you might have been receiving quite a bit of like guidance about implementation from Nora to this point and her team. I know I saw Mark on the call. So they are awesome and have been really supportive on giving training on how to implement the Government Data Privacy Act. Things are changing now. So Nora's still around. She's still going to be a big part of the privacy space, but she's no longer going to be giving implementation guidance. She's going to be conducting oversight. So it's very possible that now if you email Nora and ask her a question, she's going to say, oh, now I'm the state privacy auditor. And so I do oversight, I don't do implementation. And then she will instead point you to the Office of Data Privacy, which is a separate office that is run by Chris Bramwell. So just know that your communication with Nora might change a little bit, but she's still awesome and is still great. And Mark from Nora's office just posted in the chat. He says, if you're unsure who to contact, you can still reach out to us at the State Privacy Auditor's Office and we will facilitate communication. Yeah, so that's a great point, Mark. So you don't need to just like completely give up. Just know that they might point you to Chris Bramwell's office. All right, another item I wanted to mention is that under these new amendments, LEAs and USBE will be required to create an annual privacy program report. And if requested, provide that report to the Office of Data Privacy. This report is supposed to be created every year at the end of December. And this next one is like kind of new, but kind of not. So every district and charter school is supposed to already have a chief administrative officer. So you probably do. But what has changed is now that person's name needs to be reported to state archives so that state archives knows who that person is. And the final thing I'll mention, although there are other items to consider, is that under this new bill, districts and charters, as well as all government entities, are required to post at least one website notice and sometimes two. So I'm going to go ahead and explain that on the next slides. I do see we have a question from Rick. Will there be a template for the annual privacy program report? The answer is almost certainly yes. That will be coming not from us, but from the Office of Data Privacy, which is, again, Chris Bramwell's office. Okay, Donovan asks, who is typically the chief administrative officer? I'm guessing it's usually the superintendent. So at the State Board of Education, our chief administrative officer is Superintendent Sid Dixon. Jeremy or Nicole, you guys have a little bit of training on this. Do you know who typically acts as the chief administrative officer?
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think that typically it is a superintendent. Yeah, just whoever is at the top of the chain, basically.
Okay, great. So in a charter school, that's probably the charter school director.
Yeah, or anyone that they decide would be appropriate for that role. But yeah, typically someone who has the most sort of authority and responsibility at an entity.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for confirming that. All right, so we're going to dive into these two website notices that you're going to need to create. Again, everyone will need to have at least one of these. Some of you will need to have two. The first notice is just basically a general statement of privacy information. Every single government entity is going to need to have this on their website. So it gives the public information, just a lot of it is just like who to reach out to, how to file a complaint. So I'll just walk through these quickly. First, you need to identify the government entity responsible for the government website. So for most of you, it would be saying something like, oh, this website belongs to Iron County School District or something like that. You need to give the post information about how to contact the person responsible for the website. You need to provide information about how a user may seek access to the user's personal data or user data. This is kind of like a continuation of what came to pass in last year's bill, which is making sure that everyone can access the data that a government entity stores about them, which you might be thinking, oh, that sounds familiar because FERPA already guarantees that right for student data. So that it's just an expansion of that for any personal data. They also the people reading the notice need to be told how they can request to correct or amend their data, how to file a complaint with the data privacy ombudsperson. This is a person at the state, at the Office of Data Privacy at Chris Bramwell's office, who receives and responds to complaints. And additionally, how an at-risk employee can have their personal information classified as a private record. So even if you're a public employee, typically if you're a public employee, your information is shared pretty publicly, but you may not know that if an employee is at risk, for example, maybe they have a restraining order or something like that, then there is an avenue for them to have their information classified as a private record. Okay, so all of you on this call, if you work for an LEA, are going to need to create this notice and post it on your website. I believe that the Office of Data Privacy will be providing a template for this. Can't say for sure, but that's what I heard. The second notice is dependent upon whether your website, your school or district website, actually collects information, such as a website tracking feature. So if you use Google Analytics, for example, you're going to need to have this notice. So if you collect data on your website, you're going to need to state the tracking technology that's used, what data is collected, the purpose and use for that data. Bless you, Nicole Sanchez. I can see you sneezing. The people who will have access or who will have the data shared with them, the people you sell the data to, which hopefully you're not doing, and the record series that the data applies to. So this one, I think you'll also be receiving a template from the Office of Data Privacy about this. All right. We have a question about a deadline for posting these. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, Troy. Does anyone on my team know?
I was just looking through the bill and I don't see a deadline specifically for that section.
Okay.
So it may just technically be in effect when the bill goes into effect.
Okay.
Which is in May.
All right. The next bill I wanted to touch on, we'll go through these next ones pretty quickly because they impact you a little bit less. This one is a kind of just for your awareness. There was a bill passed called HB 508 School Data Amendments, which it basically gives the State Board of Education, USBE, a bunch of work to do. And this is the description of that work. So the board needs to create a data systems and reporting advisory committee, which is to be composed of a bunch of different LEA folks and other stakeholders. It also tasks USBE with studying 3 topics. One is student information systems used in LEAs. So that's like your Aspire, your PowerSchool, your Skyward, et cetera. The second part of the study is to study data collection, storage, and retention practices in LEAs. And third is to study the reports and requirements that are required of LEAs. And then the USBE needs to submit back to the legislature basically the findings of the study, including recommendations for potential changes. And that will happen in 2 parts. One is in fall of this year, and the other is in fall of 2026. So I bring this to your attention for 2 reasons. One, you will start seeing, you or some of your peers at your district or charter school will start seeing outreach from Utah State Board of Education staff members. Some of it might come from us, but especially in the beginning, a lot of it is going to be coming from other staff, such as Aaron Bruff, the Director of Data and Statistics, or Jared Felt, the Director of Information Technology. So if you receive surveys or other outreach, your action is that we need you to respond to those. And then also, you might want to consider applying for this advisory committee that I just told you about. And when that advisory committee is ready to receive applications, I imagine we'll be sending out communication to the listservs about that. Okay, two more bills. We'll go quite quickly on these two. There's a bill that said that, hey, parents used to have to submit immunization opt-out or exemption forms pretty regularly. And this bill changes that so that basically a parent can one time exempt their child from receiving immunizations. And then the school is obligated to maintain that record, that exemption record, and hold on to it for as long as the child is in K-12 education. Also, if a child moves from one school to another, they need to send any immunization records to the new school. So I believe there's conversation about this happening in sort of an automated way via the USIMS project. But in the meantime, this is something that schools will need to address on their own, is making sure that vaccination or immunization records are being sent when a student transfers. And then also you can no longer insist that a parent fills out an exemption form over and over again while the child is enrolled. Okay, and then the last one, this is just really kind of for your awareness. There was a bill that passed that required app stores, so basically the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, to keep track of the age of the user using that app store. And then by so doing, it would help. The idea is that it would help prevent students from engaging in apps that are too mature for them, or that require them to commit to contracts that they aren't old enough to commit to. And so the onus of this is supposed to fall on the App Store. But check it out, the App Store needs to verify a user's age and to obtain parental consent. So I don't know how this is going to play out, but I just wanted you to be aware, for those of you who work in the IT space, that there might come a point where you need to grapple with, an App Store might be asking for parent consent or asking you to verify age. And so there might be some exploration of how to accomplish that. But I imagine it's a little bit down the road. Oh, one more thing. So USBE puts out this amazing document. It's called the Public Education Summary. And it's very close to being published, but it's not done yet. But it's just awesome and is a great resource for the bills we talked about today, but also more. And so when that's ready, we can, disperse it on all the listservs and whatnot.